Victor, Hernando, and Mono went right to a stack of shovels that were piled up next to the baby trees. Tino said to Henry, "You should have been here last night. We must have hauled a ton of dirt from the old grove to the Golden Dawns." He pointed to the stack and said, "Grab a shovel." Then he held up his Kmart bag. "Check it out." Tino dumped out a pile of thick black work gloves onto the desk. Everybody grabbed a pair and pulled them on, Tino smiling. "I bought 20 pairs of these gloves for you boys with delicate hands." Victor said, "Yeah, I'll mess your face up with some delicate hands." Tino said, "My daddy and my Uncle Charlie are out in the Cleopatra Grove starting the fire. They're going to call us out to haul tires and brush. Luis is going to stay in the new grove and run the pumps. He's going to call us to chop ice off the trees." He smiled at Victor. "In our spare time, we're going to do what we did last night. We're going to keep the Golden Dawns packed with dirt." Then Tino extended one gloved hand towards us and held it there, just like Victor did before each soccer game. We crowded in and put our hands on top of his. He said, "You know what's up. Time and temperature. Luis said it's going to be 10 hours of a hard freeze tonight. Trees are going to die no matter what we do. We gotta save what we can." Victor said calmly, "Let's do it," and the circle broke up. We filed outside with our shovels into the cold sting of the wind. The sun was dropping in the sky. The temperature was dropping too. We headed out into the old groves of trees, now bare of fruit, the grove of the Cleopatra tangerines. Their leaves seemed to be withering, shriveling. We walked through the sights and smells of last night's battle to a high point of land. Tino gestured in a slow circle. "Check this out." The trees in this spot were tall, weathered, and cracked, haunted house trees. Luis says to use these to keep the brush fire going. Daddy and Tio Carlos will do the chopping, and we'll do the hauling. Tino looked at Henry D. "These trees are all dead. We call them lightning trees. They're at the highest point in the grove, so they get zapped by lightning. They've been dead for years. We don't chop them down, though, because they act like lightning rods. I hope we'll get away with just chopping down one or two for the fire tonight." Tino started downhill, and we followed. Henry pointed out a line of metal contraptions that were about 4 feet high. Each had a wide, round base and a narrow stovepipe sticking from it. "These are smudge pots. Wait till you see them when they're burning. Fire comes shooting out of the tops of them." He called out, "Tino, we're going to be hauling the diesel for these smudge pots." "Oh, Tino, are we going to be hauling the diesel for these smudge pots?" "Ain't nobody else going to do it." Tino turned to the end of the row and stopped. He pointed out a skinny 3-sided wooden box about 5 feet tall. Henry and I looked inside. It was a glass thermometer attached to a white metal plate that had Pepsi written across it. The temperature read 35 degrees. "You'll see these at different spots, high spots and low spots inside the grove. I call Luis with the temperatures, and he calculates what we have to do and how much time we have to do it in. Time and temperature." As we approached the lowest point in the grove, the trees began to look scorched. They smelled like smoke and rubber. We reached a clearing that had obviously been the site of the fire the night before. Tomas Cruz and his brothers were placing dead branches in a crisscross pattern, laying the foundation for tonight's fire. A revolting smell of burnt rubber seeped up from the debris. Tino poked at his uncle as we passed by. "¿Qué pasa, tío?" "Tú sabes," he replied. We emerged from the old grove into the wide, square field of the Golden Dawn tangerines. How different this field looked now. Tino and his crew had dumped 1,000 small mounds of dirt in here, like 1,000 giant anthills. They covered up all of those black irrigation hoses. Each little tree was now packed with dirt about a foot high, with a few green leaves sticking out the top. Tino spoke again to Henry D. "We have to make sure these trees are packed above the bud union, right here." He pointed to a spot halfway up one of the dirt mounds. "If we don't, the Golden Dawns are dead, and we got ourselves 1,000 rough lemon trees." He paused for emphasis. "That can't happen." We continued along the back of the square field until we entered the new grove. There were twice as many tall, skinny sprinklers as last time. In the distance, I could see that one part of the grove was already being watered by them from high above. We walked toward the sound of a diesel pump until we came to a rickety corrugated iron shed, kind of lean-to, that was open on one side. Luis was inside it, looking at the dials on the pump and making notes. We formed a group around him. He said, "Tonight's the night, homeboys. All over this town, all over this part of the state, people are going to get hurt by this freeze. It's a killer. It's going to kill right down to the wood, right down to the ground." He looked up at us. Actually, he looked up at me. He said, "You understand the plan, right? We're icing the new grove, we're packing the Golden Dawns, and we're burning the old grove. What's alive in the morning and what's alive What's alive in the morning is what's alive in the morning. He pointed at Victor. Did you guys get some rest? Yeah, we crashed all day. You ready for another night of this? Sure. You know we're always ready to rumble. Yeah, I know that. Just be careful, all of you. Luis looked to the west, so we all turned out with him. The sun was sinking low. The Cleopatra trees stood black in the orange light like Halloween cutouts. The temperature was dropping by the minute, and the wind was whipping up. I thought about my phone call to Mom in Lake Windsor Downs. The people were inside, welcoming the freeze with hot cocoa and fake logs and Christmas CDs. In Tangerine, the people were heading out to fight it with shovels and axes and burning trees. That turned out to be our last moment of peace. For the next 12 hours, we waged a fierce and increasingly desperate battle to save the Cruz's family trees. We began with the smudge pots in the old grove. 100 smudge pots had to be filled with fuel, fired up, and kept burning all night. We set out in pairs to do it. Henry and I were given 2 gas cans and a lighter, as soon as we figured out what to do with them. The smudge pots were hellish machines, belching foul-smelling smoke and shooting a dangerous wild flame out the top, like upside-down rockets. We made hundreds of trips to the big orange diesel tank. Diesel generators pumped the water that Luis spread over the new grove. Diesel generators lit the new grove and the Golden Dawn field. Whenever they weren't responding to a crisis, we were hauling diesel. But there was one crisis right after another. A crisis might begin with a call from Tomas that the brush fire was going out. We'd take off on a run through the Cleopatra Grove, choking on the smoke, tripping in the dark. Tomas would be there hacking apart a lightning tree, and we'd drag the dead limbs to the bonfire. Then we'd run back to the diesel tank. Soon Luis would call, and we'd take off for the new grove. We'd use our shovels to scrape at trees that were getting too heavily coated with ice, trees that were about to crack. On and on it went like that, repacking dirt, hauling tires. We battled against the ever-dropping temperature, 30 degrees, 28 degrees, 26 degrees, but we were losing. The fire in the old grove was blazing high and wild, scorching the leaves off anything near it. By midnight, we had chopped down 4 lightning trees. The ice was forming too rapidly in the new grove. The coatings on the trees were too thick. The loud cracking sound of trees splitting off branches like amputated limbs, or splitting in two like they'd been pole-axed, hung horribly in the frozen night air. We were losing. For all our frantic efforts, the temperature continued to drop. It must have been about 2 o'clock when I saw Tino and Victor standing in front of one of those Pepsi thermometers. Victor was screaming at it, 24 degrees, 24 degrees. It was like his frozen breath was spelling out the awful words. Tino got off the walkie-talkie with Luis and announced, Luis said this, if it stays 24 degrees for 10 more minutes, then it's all over. He's calling it off. We're all going home. I stopped in my place in a row of Golden Dawns, and I set down my can of diesel. One by one, I pried my black-gloved fingers back, trying to straighten them out. For the first time that night, I felt the cold, and I felt exhaustion. I dropped to my knees on that frozen piece of earth. Weary to the core of my body, I looked over to the left. The new grove was glistening like an angel on a Christmas tree, lit from within by the light of the diesel generator. Every tree dripped icicles, from the top down to the ground, and the glow of all of them together was more beautiful than anything I had ever seen. To my right, the smudge pots that had bloated bonfire were spewing out over every living thing. I saw Tomas and his brother emerge from the black and billowing smoke, marching toward Tino. I turned back and saw that Luis was coming down too. They all met at the thermometer and talked for 5 minutes. Finally, Tomas and his brother broke away and marched back into the scorched grove. Luis said one more thing to Tino, and then went back to his duties.